So, the gods exist. Sometimes in D&D worlds, our real-world assumptions just don't function. The gods are real, apparent, and have spent centuries shaping the world's very history. So as someone with a master's degree in religion and society, I feel confident in answering this question today. Are D&D atheists idiots? I've recently seen a very amusing short from the Monkey DM which compared D&D atheists to the flat earthers of our world. It gets to the heart of our issue very succinctly. There is demonstrable evidence that miracles occur, and the gods have their hands in shaping world history and events. However, I will say his short misses a few nuances which are worth discussing. Firstly, the flat earth theory is constructive in that it posits a new way of thinking which helps expand the understanding of truth that we have in our world. That's the goal, at least. This statement of truth largely revolves around pulling back the curtain on a false narrative that they declare is overwhelming the minds of many. Atheism, in its traditional form, can be seen differently. The sole and fundamental premise of atheism is that divinity does not exist in our world. Atheism does not construct a worldview. It can rather be seen as a privation of faith, an argument that only exists in relation to denying the existence of something else. In other words, while the flat earth theory can exist independently of other worldviews about the world's shape, atheism cannot exist without theism. This is not the case in D&D worlds. See, gods are not only accepted fact, but they have material and concrete influence on the activities of clerics, churches, and divine artifacts, as well as influencing nature and magic itself, depending on the setting. In D&D canon, people have been to the afterlife and returned, seen angels and avatars of deities wandering around the world. And heck, some species only exist due to certain deities' favour. Denying this reality then can be rather difficult. It can either come in the form of sheer ignorance, or in a sort of conspiratorial denial of the authority of anyone who claims contact with the divine. There are a couple of other ways which we will explore later in the video, but for now, this will serve our purpose. The former of these can easily occur in the case of a farmer who's been isolated from all of this god stuff and indeed magic for most of his life, living on his homestead and farming his land. He's never had a chance encounter with an adventurer, much less a cleric, and his understanding of the gods is limited to maybe knowing a name or two. Unless such an individual meets an itinerant priest or preacher in his lifetime, what purpose would he have to actually sign up to a fervent belief in any of the nonetheless real gods? They don't affect his day-to-day life in any particular way. And even if they did, how would he know? The second position, however, is much more like our modern flat earthers. This individual chooses to deny the reality of divinity, perhaps viewing the overwhelming weight of evidence as a conspiracy, a trick, some illusion put in place by some great evil devil that seeks to enthrall anyone who believes this apparent falsehood. This could be as simple as a creationist-style fervent faith in something other, some other narrative of how everything went. The individual could simply want to go against the status quo, go against what they've been told, and have some individualism in their thought process. Or this could be as philosophically complex as mirroring Descartes' Deus Deceptor, which is a thought experiment which posits, what if all of the reality I see before me is some elaborate trick by some cruel devil? One could suggest, for example, that all deities are in fact just aspects, tricks, created by this one great cosmic entity that seeks worship above all else. They're simply expressions created to lure people in to belief. You could say that this whole world is a cosmic joke, and that every person of faith is therefore a thrall to this grand, beyond cosmic entity. Alternatively, adopting solipsism, the belief that you alone are real, and that the whole world around you is a construct, would also be a way to deny the reality of deities. The trouble with these approaches is that the gods don't like to be denied in their existence. An unlucky conspiratorial atheist may find themselves visited by an angry cleric, a beleaguered planetar, or perhaps just smited by an almighty thunderbolt. Sure, you can be an atheist in a D&D world, and you can claim some tenuous reason for doing so, be that some grand conspiracy or simply wanting to be different, but that doesn't make it a wise decision, unless you have a set of gods that are completely non-vindictive. In many settings, gods gain their power from great trials, and can occasionally be raised from the ranks of mortals. These gods especially, with a personal investment in their own journey to power, are quite likely, unfortunately, to take a heavy dislike to our theoretical atheist and, shall we say, cause some problems along the way in the name of reminding them of their existence. They may, depending on alignment, decide to correct you, or to make your life, or your death, a living hell. Now, all this philosophy is not very D&D, I hear you cry. Wrong. I present to you 2nd edition's Planescape. It's coming to 5e relatively soon, but the original setting book is such a delightful read that I don't know why it needs a reprint. My guess, WotC is going to reduce the amount of dialectical terms and the conversational style of the book, which really are part of what makes it special. And they might end up blunting the philosophical bent of the whole setting. So before that happens, I want to introduce you to Sigil, the City of Doors. It's a planar nexus, ruled over by an entity known as the Lady of Pain, whose guiding principles involve keeping meddlers out of Sigil. In this case, that means beings of great power and influence. So we're talking gods, avatars, devils, and demon lords. All are banned from the city of Sigil. And anyone found conspiring with powerful extraplanars receives a pretty harsh punishment of being mazed, locked in an eternally shifting, impossible to escape maze for the rest of time. And rumour has it that anyone who worships the Lady of Pain as a goddess receives an even worse fate. This setting, as you might imagine, is the perfect place for all those atheists, agnostics, and critics of the divine to hang out without fear of divine retribution. If such a place exists in your world, a space where the divine eye cannot gaze, then it will almost certainly quickly become a refuge for these sorts of individuals. They will of course be radicals, and shunned by many in your world, but historically atheists have always existed, even in spite of overwhelming cultural hegemonies of faith. It's a strange fact of human history, but it is also true that there will always be people who rail against the system. But we can learn a lot from the roving gangs of philosophers in Sigil about how to import such difficult concepts into our game in a sensible fashion. I'm now going to present some of the more interesting factions from the 2nd edition publication, specifically as they pertain to denial of divine authority. Remember, all of the factions of Planescape engage with the divine in somewhat taboo ways, and I would encourage finding a copy yourself and reading all about them before the retcon where they all got into a fight and half the factions died out. But for our current discussion at hand, there are 3 that are most important for discussing how atheism can possibly even function in a Dungeons & Dragons world. Firstly, we're going to be talking about the prime candidate for D&D atheism. I mean, these guys are literally named after the word. The Athar believe that God is an improper term to describe the powerful entities that rule the multiverse. They're not to be understood as divinities. They are to be understood simply as powerful entities. There is certainly some philosophical merit to this position. Pantheons are constantly in flux. Gods can die, and gods can rise from even the ranks of mortals. The Athar take this a step further and refuse to worship any god, claiming them all to be fraudulent. They falsely claim that they are better, or more authoritative, or more worthy of worship than any other being in the world. If there were any true god, they argue, it would be unknowable to those who exist within this world, incomprehensible in scope, scale, so that no mind can truly behold it. It would be closer to a universal constant, or the god of deism, which is a real philosophy here on Earth. They say these bickering squabblers that people call gods don't deserve our worship or our acclaim. And if we look at the history of many D&D worlds, they may well have a point. The Bleak Cabal, like the Athar, refuse to find any meaning in a system of gods. The Bleakers, as they are sometimes called, assert that the only thing that is evident in this world is that there are physical processes which occur. There are limits to how fast things can move. There are rules as to how an object is affected when it is under gravity. And there are processes which govern the movement of muscles. However, the Bleakers assert that ascribing any sort of external meaning to these physical processes that exist within the world is pointless. It's silly, and purely an exercise in futility. When a creature moves quickly in pursuit of its goal, using its musculature to force itself towards the finishing line of a race, say, the Bleak Cabal would say that beyond the fulfillment of the personal executive function of the physical processes of a person, the race itself has not very much meaning. Winning, losing, it doesn't matter. These aren't fundamental processes that exist within the universe. You can't win existence. Any attempt to say that this race was honouring a deity, or was an attempt to best other individuals, would earn a Bleaker's round distaste. They deny the gods, metaphysical meaning, and even philosophy itself, suggesting that individuals should find meaning in what's actually present to all beings across the universe. The clear and apparent facts of living within a physical world. A world that has universal constants and laws that are fundamental to existence. Providing food to those who require it to function. Bettering your ability to pull your own weight. And continuing to engage with this physical reality by staying alive are some of the key tenets of the Bleakers. They don't necessarily say the gods don't exist, but they say, what does it actually matter? In most worlds, there is no god of gravity. There is no god of causality. There is no god of the fundamental processes that make everything work. If the gods and you are all bound by these laws, what is the point in inventing some grand structure of meaning to sit on top of that? We have the rules in front of us. We should just engage with the game. The Sign of One is a group of people who believe that the individual is at the centre of his own reality. This does not necessarily mean that they disbelieve everything around them, like in the example of Descartes' Deus Deceptor, but rather that the individual imagination of one being can shape their reality. In other words, they have no need for gods, as they ultimately believe that the reality that they shape for themselves is what is meaningful in the world. Self-determining, positively creative and self-affirming, these signers make their way through the world without a care for the divine, because they are fundamentally a part of the tapestry that is woven around them. Indeed, some signers go so far as to enter into a solipsistic state, where they deny the truth of anything that is not them. This is an extreme position and certainly not common among the group, but it can happen. It is a utter denial of anything but oneself and the creative act of making your own world. Once someone starts believing that, well then all thoughts of gods go straight out of the window. When the only one who matters is yourself, why would you ever trust any of the myriad divine claimants external to what you know to be real? But signers kind of sit on the opposite side of this belief in the Matrix, where the whole world is set up to deceive just you. It's not quite like that. You see, the solipsistic signer believes that there is nothing beyond the periphery, except what you make of the world. There's nothing out there seeking to trick you. Rather, you maintain control of your own reality as long as you maintain control of your mind and your imagination. These individuals are truly the kings of self-affirmation, the concept that if you manifest it into the world, it will occur for you. It's a kind of New Age philosophy, but it has its benefits. It can lead people to be wildly creative and fundamentally distinct from the thought patterns that occur around them. In a way, it does somewhat allow one to break free from the Matrix. So, there we have it. A collection of some of the weird and wonderful expressions of atheism or anti-theism or agnosticism which exist within D&D's canon. However, D&D atheism comes at a price. The Athar openly antagonise powerful entities, risking the wrath of the gods for their revolutionary anti-theism. The Bleakers risk depression, a full commitment to an utter and complete lack of any external meaning to anything in the world can get you down. And the signers? Well, if you go around acting like you're the most important thing in the universe, sooner or later, you're gonna have to put up or shut up. Even the ignorant farmer, who never found need for a god to believe in, may yet find himself suffering when his religious neighbour gains his god's favour, and all of the rain just so happens to fall on his neighbour's fields. Indeed, much of the reason these Planescape factions are able to exist at all is because Sigil acts as insulation from the true power of deities in D&D. It's basically a divine dead zone, which means there are fewer repercussions for taboo beliefs. Atheists can and do exist in D&D, but each of them takes on great personal risk, knowingly or not. As a philosophical position, it can be made tenable. My personal favourite variety of D&D atheism comes in the Athar, whose denial of the god label seems relatively justified when you take into account all of the horrible things that the gods do to each other, and the fact that mortals of dubious quality and integrity can still rise to become deities. But everything we've discussed today comes from real philosophical positions and thought from our real world. So if you're hoping to play a character that doesn't put their faith in the gods, go for it. But remember, even though your character does not have to be some conspiracy nut, and doesn't have to be stupid, not all D&D atheists are, they are still a radical, and they need to act as such, being prepared for charges of idiocy, lunacy, and blasphemy being levelled at them on a daily basis. Heck, you may even regularly get compared to a flat earther. And that's if some disgruntled god doesn't smite you down first. I hope you've enjoyed this look into D&D atheism. There's a load to say on this topic, and obviously I couldn't cover it all in this video. But a lot of these discussions can be very interesting, especially as I've seen anecdotally quite a lot of non-religious or even anti-religious folks do end up playing this game. I think there's a lot to be said, especially in the metagame context, about the relationship between faith and D&D. But this isn't the time or the place for that particular can of worms. I certainly imagine that this video alone may have ruffled a few feathers. If you do want to continue the discussion, head down into the comments, and if you'd like to see more investigations of these sort of fascinating topics, subscribe to the channel. That's how I know you want to see more. With that said, though, I've been Tom, otherwise known as the Grungeon Master, and I will see you in the next video.